Okay, this is my first reaction video ever, so excuse me if I'm a little bit rough on this, but I'm going to give it the best try I can. I was sent this video from a friend of mine who, he's very pro-Israel, and, I don't have a lot of, investment, I should say, into one side or another as, who's right or wrong, necessarily. I mean, I've grown up, since I was a kid, basically, I have seen a lot of footage where basically the Palestinians are struggling and Israel's, doing occasional, low volume massacres on the Palestinian people. So I never really had particularly good opinion of Israel on this one. That being said, I am aware that things can be skewed in one direction or another, but it's kind of, I do remember that George W. Bush did want to bolster the Israeli state because he's a born-again Christian, and if he can facilitate the Jews returning to the homeland, then that'll bring about the second coming of Christ, which will then bring about the annihilation of the world and basically burn everybody except for the true chosen Christians, which would include the Israelis and Palestinians, by the way. I mean, they would all be burned as well. So, but that's kind of a big factor of his motivation from what I had seen at the time. Aside from this, basically, my main position is I don't want people dying. I want there to be the least amount of suffering as humanly possible. So I have seen this once. It was a few months ago, but it's been on the back of my mind. So I thought I would just address basically kind of the arguments as they come and kind of examine them as they are. So, all right, let's take a look. Here we go.
This video is going to be interesting. Even if you have heard 1,000 different reports about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I promise you that this will give you a new perspective. I will be talking about the settlements, the occupation, the two-state solution, Islam, Jerusalem, the solution, and a whole lot more. Before I break down the Palestinian narrative, a small trigger warning. I like facts. If you don't like...
This is really not a good way to start a video. This comes across condescending, belittling to anybody who's against your position, which doesn't actually hold a strong, doesn't give you a strong footing right there. It actually makes you look weak when you say a small trigger warning. I like facts. This shows that you really, really, really think that you're right, and anybody who disagrees with you is wrong. This is not a good way to start. By the way, the name of this video itself, Free Palestine, no thanks. This comes across, now we'll get into this, more, but this comes across as something like a slave owner saying, oh, my slave really doesn't like me for what I've done to him, and would I free him now and give him the opportunity to retaliate? No way, dude. That's what it comes across as. I mean, I guess it could be taken a couple other ways, but that's the vibe. And then, with the energy that this guy's bringing at the beginning, I like facts and F off, basically, it just is not a good start. I gotta say that much.
What I'm saying, then bring me facts that contradict what I'm saying. If I say that Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, or that the Jews said yes to the partition plan in 1947 and the Arabs said no, or that there was no such thing as Palestinians in the 18th century, then feel free to prove me wrong.
Okay, all of this is beside the point of, people are being killed in mass right now. A lot of people are dying. Journalists are being targeted. I mean, I'm one of those people who I don't really separate between kids, women, and men. People find it, I think, more like tugging at your heartstrings if they do. Oh, half of the people killed in this conflict are kids. Yeah, that sucks. But I mean, any of the death is bad, and so that's kind of where I stand.
Send me a link to a letter from a pilgrim to the land of Israel who said
What?
that he met a nice Palestinian, I'm asking you to challenge me. If you just write me that I'm Zionist or that I'm biased or that I've received money from the Israeli government to make
Well, this does come across as a Zionist position, but I mean, like, whatever, you know. I mean,
this video, those aren't actually arguments. And for your information, I am completely against the current government of Israel. The good thing about Israel is that, unlike most of the Arab Muslim countries, Israel is a democracy. I'm not afraid of the government preventing me from expressing my thoughts.
okay, yeah, but your thoughts just happen to exactly align with everything that the government wants to happen. Okay, so you're like basically you're a spokesperson for the government, like saying exactly what they want people to hear and what people know. So why would you be afraid? So I mean, like trying to pull that card doesn't hold a lot of merit.
Israel is not Iran or Syria or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Gaza. And I don't delete comments. Some people are 100% for Israel and some are 100% against it. I'm aiming for the middle ground. If I get dislikes and smart comments, then I know that this video has reached.
By the way, I've seen this video before, like I said, and he's not aiming for a middle ground in this video. He's absolutely 100% against Palestine, which, I mean, like if that's your position, fine, but own it and give good reasons for it.
The right audience. But do give this video a like and subscribe. The last thing that I want to ask is this. Don't use bombastic language in your comments if you don't have the numbers to support it. Ethnic cleansing is a very powerful expression. If in 1948 there were around 700,000 Palestinians and today there are 7 million in the land of Israel, you can't really use this term. However, if you want to use the words ethnic cleansing, you can do so to describe what happened to the.
Oh my God, this guy, Jesus. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, basically what they're doing to the Palestinians right now, I mean, they do have work visas to where people can come over and work extremely low wage jobs and basically do the labor for Israel. Yeah, so they have basic permits, for some people to be able to do that. Aside from that, basically everybody's been kind of pushed into, uh, into Gaza and kind of now that northern Gaza is bombed out, then basically they're mostly pushed into the south. So anyway.
Jews in Arab countries. In Morocco in 1948, there were 265,000 Jews. Today there are around 2,000. In Iraq, there were 135,000 Jews in 1948. Today there are fewer than 10. Algeria used to be home to 140,000 Jews. Today there are fewer than 50, and I can.
Okay, so here's an issue with this. Like he sets it up like, talk about ethnic cleansing. Look at this, these different countries or whatever. They started with this population, and now look, wow, one of them is from 38,000 down to 0. Oh my God! So the way he sets it up makes it look like these people have just been killed en masse, and just absolutely nobody has reported on. Just doing some basic math here, at least 500,000 people just wiped off the planet without so much as a news headline or whatever. They moved to Israel. This is the thing, I mean, they moved to what is now Israel and formed their state and have expanded, and so it's like if that would be like calling what's that place in Michigan? Anyway, in Michigan, Detroit, so where they had all the factories and stuff like that. That'd be like calling that an ethnic cleansing just because the factories closed down and people moved out. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, people found better opportunities in Chicago, so they were ethnic cleansed out of, whatever. So, anyway.
Go on. It is Muslim countries who perpetrated ethnic cleansing on the Jews. But this statement doesn't quite cover what has been happening. Muslims have been doing this to all minorities, not only to the Jews. If you zoom out, you will see that 100 years ago, there were many Christian communities and other small ethnic groups in the Middle East. They are all being wiped out by Muslims. For some reason, the Western world, the Christian world, doesn't want to talk about it.
Christians, let me tell you something. Christians, and I found this is basically true of all like devout religious groups, is they love persecution. Oh my God. You give them a persecution and they're so happy, then it just makes them feel like justified in their beliefs and whatnot. Now, if this is true that Muslims were killing Christians, I'm against that too. My position is going to be the same across the board. I do have another thing that I might want to disclose here is that I'm not religious, and I basically think that like all of this stuff is like different versions of Harry Potter. Like my magical wizard has this name and had these barbaric rules, and no, mine had this name and had these barbaric rules, and no, and then they do a bunch of fighting. They got to be proven right, otherwise, I don't know what. So I think it's all just ridiculous, and the fact that these like religions are always fighting, just like, hey, oh, what, you don't trust that your God is all powerful and is going to just come out victorious in the end? You got to do his dirty work for him. That's pretty weak of your God, huh? So anyway, that's
As
a
a
different
Jew,
story.
I care about what is going on with Jews all over the world, and I find it very odd that Christians don't really care about Nazareth or Bethlehem, which are kind of important to the followers of Jesus and used to be 80% Christians 50 years ago and now are 80% Muslims. The
Yeah, who
same goes
cares?
for Christians in Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. In Nigeria, Muslim organizations have murdered thousands of Christians. 2 million Christians have fled Iraq and become refugees in the last 2 decades, but no one seems to care about them, neither the media nor the universities. Everyone is obsessed with the Palestinian refugees. Did you know that the UN has 2 agencies for refugees? One for hundreds of millions of refugees all over the world, and another one called UNRWA, which is only for the most privileged refugees on earth, the Palestinians. Don't just take my word for it. Check it out for yourself.
This is a really odd argument. I mean, this is like, yeah. So there are like basic. Okay, so there's wives that are beaten, and there's groups that will take them in overnight and then kick them out on the street or something like that. But there's this one group of abuse victims of domestic violence that they get tents and they can sleep outside in the tents for a few months. Look how privileged those abuse victims are. This is what it comes across as. This is really, really odd. I mean, I have seen like facilities that have come for the Palestinians. It's tents. They live in tents side by side like that in big fields, and yeah. So what is that an argument? I mean, really, is that an argument? This is ridiculous. Okay, here we go.
So let's talk about the story the Palestinians like to tell and the media like to repeat. The Palestinians lived in Palestine for hundreds of years. They lived peacefully alongside a small Jewish minority until the rise of Zionism, a colonialist movement which, under the umbrella of the European imperial powers, started kicking the Palestinians out of their land and homes, causing the current situation. And now for the facts. In the long history of the land of Israel, there was never such a thing as a Palestinian people until the 20th century. Millions
So
of pilgrims have come to the land of Israel over the last 3,000 years. They've come across Jews, Arab, Christians, Muslims, Druze, Turks. They've never met a Palestinian. Now, you might say, regardless of whether they have existed as a nation, all people should enjoy human rights, and all people should have the right to identify themselves as they wish.
this is like a low key. This is everybody has the right to identify themselves as they wish. This is really ridiculous. Like this is like really kind of like a, what do they call it, where you're throwing red meat to the base, basically, like kind of equating this with like the transgender movement or something like that. Anyway, it's a little bit ridiculous. Whatever. Basically, again, my concern is you've got a group of people that did move into the area and then push another people out. Okay, I mean, like the U.S. has done that too, and I don't agree with that. And now they're slaughtering them in mass. I mean, yeah. Anyway, my opinions aside on this, that's what I would like to see addressed here, not some historical whatever blah 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 from back in the day, and yeah, like that.
And I agree. You have the right to identify yourself however you like, but you don't have the right to reinvent history. And the history of the region is very clear. This is probably the most documented piece of land on the planet. There is a very good book, a very ancient and popular book about the connections of the Jews to Judea. It is called the Bible.
Yeah, the Bible, again, like if you're, the Bible creates more atheists than anything else. You know what I mean? Like if you really want somebody to kind of examine their religion and know it well, and yeah, have them read the Bible. But good Lord, good Lord, it's a little disturbing to say the least, and unhinged in places. I mean, there's some basic like wisdom and stuff in there. There's a lot of inaccuracies. There's some historical accuracy. You could point to Harry Potter and say, oh, you see, they have England in there, so Hogwarts must exist. You know what I mean? What are you, a Muggle? Because there's some historical accuracy in Harry Potter. You know what I mean?
Now, wait. I know what you are thinking. He's going to say that God gave this land to the Jews. And no, if you believe that God gave this land to the Jews, great. And if not, also great. The undeniable point is that there is a strong connection between the Jews and the land of Israel. There are thousands of books from the last 3,000 years that write about Jews and the land of Israel. And in archaeological digs, we find Jewish coins, Jewish texts.
Again, I'm not talking about archaeological digs. I'm talking about right now, Israel blowing the crap out of, a bunch of innocent people.
And Jewish artifacts. There isn't a single book or piece of archaeological evidence that point to a Palestinian people. You don't like what I'm saying? Then prove me wrong. But it is much more than that.
I don't need to prove you wrong. It doesn't matter. That's the thing.
Muslim to Jerusalem is based on the Jewish connection. Jesus was Jewish, and the connection of Muslim to Jerusalem is also based on the Jews. Let me explain. I will go even further and say that Jerusalem was never the capital of a Muslim empire. It was always Cairo, Damascus, or Baghdad. Jerusalem was mostly important to the Muslims when they were fighting against the Jews or the Christians. Under Muslim rule, Jerusalem was often a very neglected city. This makes sense, as Jerusalem, which is mentioned some 600 times in the Jewish Bible,
all right, I might skip ahead a little bit because
once in the Quran.
Chapter 17 is pointless. This has nothing to do with anything.
Of Muhammad, he ascended from Al-Aqsa to Jerusalem. In order to understand this, you need to go back to the Jews. The Jews had two temples on what is now known as Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, the Roman Empire, and this is how there, and said that Muhammad ascended to heaven from the place where the Jewish temples stood, to heaven from the exact same spot that it. Yes, and if you find it strange, that's because you don't know Jerusalem. Nothing makes a place more holy than competition with another religion. The Muslim took the place which was the holiest for the Jews, the holiest place. Don't believe me? Here is a pamphlet of the Waqf. Although what I'm saying here is very basic history, there is a good chance you don't know about it.
Well, it doesn't matter. Honestly, this doesn't. This is like, oh, you've never read Harry Potter?
To forget the basics.
Oh my God.
Jerusalem was always the center of Jewish life.
So that's a,
Muslims
here, let
turned
me
their
stop this.
back.
See, this is the thing. This is what this is like. This is like if I murdered a bunch of people, like a bunch of my neighbors, for example, like I kill them all, and then you're like, why did you do that? I'd be like, oh, let me just tell you some history. Like you should, like there was this book from a long time ago, and or Harry Potter. It's like a few years old. Have you read it before? Oh, you haven't read it. You see, you don't know. You don't know Harry Potter, and blah blah blah. And yeah, so like, yeah, there was a wizard, and they did this spell and stuff like that. It's like you freaking murdered your neighbors over there. Like, why did you do that? Oh, yeah, like, but did you know that, like, there was a long time ago that they didn't live there in those apartments. Yeah, other people lived there. So you murdered your neighbors, dude. You're murdering people. Why are you doing that? Yeah, like the second book of the Harry Potter series is like if you haven't read that, of course, this is what comes across as.
On Jerusalem when they pray towards Mecca, and Jews pray towards Jerusalem. When Jews get married, part of the ceremony is to say that we will never forget Jerusalem.
Oh my
Jews
God.
have almost always lived in Jerusalem, even under the harshest conditions. Since the 13th century, the Muslims haven't allowed the Jews to pray at their holiest site, the Temple Mount, and the Jews have had to pay extra taxes and suffer harassment.
Okay, so here's the persecution aspect. So yay, you got that going. Woo, you guys got persecuted.
They have even had to pay the Muslims a fee to pray at the Western Wall, the closest to the temple. Hasn't only happened in Jerusalem. In Hebron, one of 4 cities that, according to tradition, is the place
gonna
where
skip through
Abraham
some of
was
this.
buried. Jews were only allowed to liberated Hebron, were Jews allowed for the first time. Why do I say liberated Hebron and not conquered? I will get to that in a minute. And now we get to the interesting part, the 19th century and Zionism. Jews have always migrated, or as we say in Hebrew, gone up to the land of Israel. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Jews came from all over the Jewish world, from Europe, from North Africa, from Yemen, in small numbers due to the harsh conditions, but there was always a steady movement of Jews coming to Israel. The first Zionist Congress was held in 1897, but 50 years beforehand, in the 1850s, there were more Jews than Muslims in Jerusalem. In the rest of the land, yes, there were more Muslims. But it is important to know that even before the start of the Zionist movement, there were dozens of Jewish settlements in the land of Israel. In the last decades of the Ottoman Empire, as in all empires, there were lots of different groups. Some groups got bigger with time, some smaller. Some bought land, some sold land. Many European powers bought land for institutions, and some groups, mostly Germans and Americans, settled in the land of Israel to speed up the second coming of Jesus. Many different groups. None of the groups use the word Palestinian to describe themselves.
This doesn't matter. Like, stop mentioning this. Oh, no, nobody used the word Palestinian. Like, who cares?
The first Zionist Congress took place in 1897. The Zionist movement was a national movement, not a colonialist or an imperialist movement, but a national one of many. This was the age of the fall of empires, the
Yay, nationalism.
German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, and of the rise of national movements. And the Zionist movement was the national movement of the Jews. It is as simple as that. In the first half of the 20th century, millions of people moved from one place to another to create nation states. What's special about the Jews is that they never stole or used violence to take any land in the land of Israel. I'm always getting comments from Muslims and pro-Palestinians about Jews stealing the land from the local Arabs. Here is a challenge for you. Give me the name of one village that the Jews stole from the Arabs from the 7th century, when the Arab Caliphate colonized the land of Israel, until 1947, when the Arabs started a war to wipe out the Jews. From the year 636 till 1947, not a single square foot was stolen by the Jews. Again, if you don't like what I'm saying, then prove me wrong.
No, that's not the issue. The issue is nowadays, like you're bombing out, a large section of the last vestiges of this population, and then you've got real estate companies already offering the opportunity to invest in real estate in that area for as part of Israel. So it doesn't hold a lot of water. I mean, it's more than just a little suspicious. It's like in like now, maybe not in 1947, but now. Now there's a land grab, and it's under the guise of fighting whatever Hamas like that. So yeah, obviously Hamas is bad, but it's not good optics when you're like, oh, we're just trying to get Hamas, and oh, by the way, real estate available. Who wants to buy? So anyway, that's
Give me the names of villages that Jews stole prior to the war.
Prior to the War of Independence, exactly, prior. Okay, so yeah, maybe not prior, but after that.
On the other hand, I can give you lots of names of Jewish villages that Arabs, or Palestinians if you will, destroyed before 1948.
Yeah, and I would be against that too. Like, I would have been arguing on the other side of the issue, pro-Israel in that spot. Yeah, anyway.
Right? Take Hebron, for example. Jews lived in Hebron for hundreds of years. In 1929, the Arabs, not 1 or 10, but whole gangs of Arabs, murdered 70 Jews, and the ancient Jewish settlement had to be abandoned until it was brought back into Jewish hands in 1967. You want more names of Jewish villages that were abandoned because of Arab violence? Here are some more. Many were rebuilt after a few years. The Arabs used violence against...
Okay, that was then. That was bad, right? That was bad. So why are you doing it now? Why are you doing it to the other people now? And why do you keep talking about history and not about now, right?
Against Jewish civilians in the land of Israel many years established.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here.
They didn't only use violence against the Jews. Christians suffered as well. Remember the German and American settlements I told you had murdered Steinbeck's great-uncle and sexually assaulted his wife and his daughter. Here is an interesting anecdote. Two other great American novelists, Mark Twain and Herman Melville, visited the land of Israel, and like hundreds of other pilgrims, they wrote about how neglected the land was, and many wrote about...
Who cares?
...how violent the local Arabs were.
Yeah.
From 1970 till...
Again, this is history. You know what I mean? Like we're getting a history lesson, but the problem is that none of this stuff is relevant to what's going on right now. So anyway.
1948, the British and the French were in control of the Middle East. The Jews blamed the British for being pro-Arab, and the Arabs blamed the British for being pro-Jewish. I will tell it as it was. The British were pro-British. They had two main interests in the region: to have oil flowing from Iraq to the port of Haifa, and to ensure the Suez Canal remained open. Arab, today it is very fashionable to be against colonial powers, and of course they did do a lot of damage, but I find it absurd that pro-Palestinians are anti-colonial, as it was the Roman Empire that gave the name Palestine to the area, and the British Empire that gave it its borders.
Yeah, again, that doesn't change, what's happening. It doesn't change anything. You can slap any label on anything, and it's like, oh, well, the British gave that name, or whatever. The British can rename that area. Okay, well, all right, kill away, have fun.
When the British and the French drew lines on maps, they invented two nations that never existed before, the Palestinians and the Jordanians. Another fact that is often overlooked is that pro-Palestinians are always talking about Jewish immigrants coming from Europe. No one talks about the Arabs who came to the land of Israel. Hundreds of thousands of Arabs from Egypt, Syria, and other places entered the land of Israel in the 1930s and 40s to work for the British and are now seen as native Palestinians. It is hard to estimate the number of Arabs who entered the land of Israel between 1917 to 1947 to work for the British, as the borders were open, but the number is in the hundreds of thousands.
All right. I mean, coming from the U.S., our country is not very old as it is. So like we can call ourselves Americans, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to make this argument to Americans, I mean, like, where do you start to draw the line? Anyway, they've, these people have lived there their whole lives. They grew up there, they worked there, whatever. They started their families there. Yeah, borders changed, country lines were drawn, and names were created and stuff like that. So anyway, so that's what it is. Now what? What, you can kill them?
Probably about half of the population of Gaza came to the land of Israel during
Yeah, I think my point is, does that devalue human life or something like that? Does it change anything? Yeah.
the British Mandate time. Their last names usually hint towards the actual origin of the family. I find it absurd that people like my great-grandmother, who came to Israel from Eastern Europe in the 1920s after dreaming about the Jewish homeland for generations, are seen as white colonialists, while Egyptians who came to work for the British in 1945 are seen as native Palestinians.
Well, you know what? I mean, like, at that time, countries were formed, and so, so, you know what I mean? Like, you had the Ottoman Empire, and now you have what, Germany. So are they not native Germans? You know what I mean? So anyway, that's a weird argument.
Now you might be saying, who cares where they came from, and
Yeah.
if they have been here for generations, they
Right.
have the right to self-determination.
They have the right to life.
Again, I agree. In 1947, the UN proposed the division of the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews said yes, and the Arabs said no, and then started a war in a bid to eliminate the Jews. The morning after the partition plan, Palestinians attacked a bus and murdered 5 Jews. This is how the war was started. They were offered a state, they said no, and start murdering Jewish civilians. Not a single Jew was spared in all of the places that fell into local Palestinian hands. Luckily for us, after 15 months of fighting the local Arabs and the 5 Arab armies that invaded Israel, we won. And yes, during the War of Independence, many Arab villages were destroyed and about 700,000 people were displaced. That's what happens when you try to wipe out your neighbors.
Well, yeah, okay. So, of course, that's to be condoned. That's to be condoned. And then the irony is that you're doing exactly the same thing now. And you're saying, well, that's what you get. Well, how about you guys? Like, what are you doing? And of course, you're not paying any sort of price. I mean, like, yeah, Hamas attacked fairly recently. Like, they've been in an open air prison for quite a long time now. And then, I think that's going to breed some sort of, what do you call it? Well, resentment, extremism. I mean, like, for I don't think anybody's going to see this, but if they do, especially Americans, imagine if another country kind of moved in and then they kind of started expanding and expanding, and then basically they kind of had enough power and they had funding and weapons and all that stuff, and they had enough power to kind of push the population of the U.S. into Detroit, okay? And everybody's walled off there, and they control the flow of electricity and water and everything like that into it, which they could shut off at any time if people misbehave. How many Americans would say, it's all good, How many of them would be like, I'm going to kill as many of those people as I possibly can? You would have so much extremism in that area. Oh my God. I mean, now, this is not condoning attacking and stuff like that. I'm just saying, like, with like, what do you think? What do you think is going to happen if you confine people and put them in some sort of a small enclosed area and then put a lot of pressure on them like that? So I mean, like, you know what I mean?
Might well lose and have to pay the price. At the same time, 800,000 Jews were
Yeah,
brutally
yeah.
expelled.
This is the thing. Yeah, you might have to pay a price, and this is the thing. Is like you're going to get extremism from the way that you're situated. You know what I mean? And like again, this is not condoning anything. Like this is like for me, this is just kind of a maddening. Like, oh my god. Anyway.
From Muslim countries. For some reason, no one cares about them or want to tell their story. Millions of articles and papers have been written about the Palestinians who had to evacuate their homes because of a war they started, yet very little has been written about the Jews living in Muslim countries who were subjected to pogroms and had to flee, even though they were innocent. Please tell me why you care so deeply about the Palestinian refugees, and yet you couldn't care less about all the millions of other refugees who had to flee at the same time.
I mean, there's not a lot of coverage. If this is true, there's not a lot of coverage on this. Okay, so like, I think basically the Palestinian example, like for the last whatever 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, has been like an ongoing, very obvious sort of like. There's a lot of um, mistreatment of people. It's a humanitarian issue. It's like a very obvious and very concentrated humanitarian issue that people can easily look at and say, well, I mean, you might have reasons. Hey, I want the second coming of Harry Potter or whatever like that to come and burn everybody and haha, F this world and stuff like that. And then you might have people who are like, this looks like a real humanitarian issue. Like, what's going on over here? Like some people would care about the humanitarian aspect of that, but if you're religious, probably you don't. But anyway.
14 million Germans, about the same number of Hindus and Muslims, Ukrainians, Armenians, Poles, people from the Balkans, and I could go on and on. The Palestinian refugees are the most privileged refugees in the world.
Again with the abuse victim. Oh, the most privileged abuse victims in the world. Wow. What a statement to make. That's so funny.
Some say that the partition plan wasn't fair as the Jews made up 1/3 of the population but got 2/3 of the land. To that I will say this: the Arabs actually also got what is now known as Jordan, so in fact the Jews got a much smaller part. And I should also add that the Arabs got all the good land and the Jews got the swampland and the desert land. And now I'm going to state a fact that is definitely going to annoy all the haters of Israel. The Jews took the swampland and the desert land and made the impossible possible. We turned the land into gold. Israel is pioneer in irrigation systems and desalination system. Israel invented vegetables and fruits that can grow in salt water and yet taste sweet. As for the Arabs, the large part of their land is now polluted and contaminated.
Okay, so good job, guys. I mean, they do get a lot of weapons and funding from the U.S., but anyway, so I'm sure that helps as well. Okay, so why are they swampland? And by the way, this is really like kind of basically kind of making an argument that they're lower evolutionary people or whatever like that, and the Jews are just higher, superior race. Basically, it's like a superior race type of thing. So.
After 1940,
but the conditions maybe don't. I mean, especially since Palestine is under control. Exactly how much can they do about pollution or garbage or whatever like that? I mean, like, what are their options? That's a consideration.
the Palestinians had years to establish a free Palestinian state, as they were under Egyptian and Jordanian rule. Yet they didn't do that. In 1964, the Palestinians established the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Now this is interesting. 1964 is 3 years before the Six-Day War. So before Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and before a single settlement was built, they were already calling for the destruction of Israel. When the Arabs say free Palestine, they don't mean we want an independent Palestinian state next to Israel. What they want is a Palestinian state that replaces Israel. The Palestinians kept rejecting all offers made to them from 1947 till 2008, when Ehud Olmert, the Israeli prime minister, offered the Palestinians all the West Bank and East Jerusalem as their capital. They said no to every offer that was made to them, invested all the money they received from the world in terror, and then cried that they were their victims. The Palestinians do have a harder life than we Israelis, but they only have themselves to blame. So what is the solution? When will there be peace? Not in the near future.
All right, if you're, I mean, like, all right, again, like some of this I don't know or whatever, but I don't know. If you're confined to a space and you don't really have economic opportunities, you don't have, a easily functioning like trade, economy, resources, stuff like that. You got another country controlling your electricity and water flow. How much can you really do with that? How much can you really do? It, I, I think basically, if you boil things down, it's like conditions create a result. You know what I mean? So if you, for example, take anybody and you put them in really good conditions with great education and, all the amenities and the potential in the world, they're probably going to do pretty well, you know. Like really good teachers and mentors, things like this, right? Take that same person and put them in a cage and just lock them away for the first 20 years of their life and then let them out and they've never heard the language. What are they going to be like? Right? So the conditions have a lot to do with how people develop. And I would say if their conditions are so bad, that's really kind of not a good look on Israel. If they're the ones kind of pulling the strings and they're the ones who control like the borders and most of the borders anyway, and the main resources that are needed to live, not really a good look.
Because this conflict is not about the land. I've already told you that even before the Six-Day War and even before 1948, the Palestinians were trying to wipe out the Jews. Here is another example. Take Gaza. In 2005, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Gaza is an Israeli and Jew-free area. The Palestinians get more money than any other group on the planet, from the US, from the European Union, from Arab countries, from the US.
Yeah, okay, so this is really interesting because Israel is US's number one ally. They get tons of money and weapons, and they don't support Palestine as a rule. Like the government on both sides has been, like both political parties and the news and everybody is all on Israel's side, and there's tons of money and weapons that go, and Israel does a lot of like the dirty work. I mean, they're like the Middle Eastern ally, and they'll go, assassinate an Iranian scientist or whatever who has the capability of enriching uranium, or they'll do some dirty work here and there, and whatever. Actually, Trump was trying to get them to help out with taking out Soleimani, I guess, but they were busy with something else, apparently. So Trump was just talking about that. Anyway, so they're kind of like the goons, and they're highly, highly supported. On the other hand, I mean, they've got like all this technology and just massive stocks of weapons. Why is it that? Okay. Anyway, so it doesn't pan out. Like what this guy is saying, it doesn't pan out.
And what do they do with this money? Infrastructure, education? No. They build tunnels and buy weapons to kill Jews. Why do they do that? The Hamas constitution makes it very clear. The first sentence is, Israel will exist until Islam wipes it out. It doesn't say we want peace.
Yeah, I mean, like, Hamas didn't have a lot of support, and Hamas is not getting weapons and all that from the U.S. So, I don't know. This is, yeah. I mean, like, Hamas was a different case back in the day when they were first voted in, but now that they've just maintained power and there's no longer really like a democracy in the area, yeah, I mean, like, the support for Hamas was really pretty low, but I'm guessing that the support's probably going to rise a little bit with the negative conditions that have been created recently.
It doesn't say we want a Palestinian state. It clearly says until Islam wipes it out, they want a Muslim caliphate. I respect Hamas for one thing only, for actually expressing and being clear about what they want, which is to eliminate Israel. Personally, I want the Palestinians to have a democratic state with human rights and freedoms, and I wish for all Arabs and Muslims to have the same. But what I want is not necessarily what they want. To solve the problem, you need to understand the problem. And the problem is made up of two things. One which Westerners don't understand anymore, religion, and one which Westerners don't want.
Oh my God, you're coming. I don't want to talk about. Wow, what a straw man! Like, what a couple of straw man to drop. Jeez, you're talking about like the U.S. where there's so much, like, just this rise in extreme religiosity and the return to values. I mean, are you serious? Like, does this guy not have any idea? This is such a straw man.
To talk about values. Religion plays no role at all in European politics. In the
Good, excellent. Oh man, like, thankfully, maybe that's why they don't have wars anymore over in Europe. You know, jeez.
US, politicians do say God bless America, and the debate surrounding abortion is partly religious. But when it
Partly,
comes to foreign policies, you don't hear American generals talk about spreading the word of Jesus.
thankfully, but you do hear a lot of the people. You know, maybe not the generals. You know, that's taboo for now, but you know,
In the Muslim world, it is very different. When Arabs kill Jews at a music festival, or Christians in a school in Nigeria, or one another in Syria, Yemen, Libya, what is it they shout? Allah Akbar, God is great.
yeah, exactly. Religion is the problem, and the thing is though, is that you guys don't see that you're also part of that. You know, it's the religion is the problem. Yeah. Anyway, and the more um, the more fundamental, and what I mean by fundamental, because I think this word gets thrown around and people don't really think about it much, but fundamental means really like following the religion, like actually following the religion. So many people don't do that, and thankfully, oh man, because if they did, I mean, it's barbaric. All of them are barbaric, you know. If they do, then you get people getting their hands chopped off and stuff like that. Now imagine Christians, for example. Now Christians might be saying, you know, like that. But for me, talking against Christianity right now, you're actually commanded to kill me for it. Take me to the town square and kill me in front of everybody to strike fear into the hearts of anybody who might in the future have, you know, spoken out against Christianity in any way. And, you know, Judaism, I think, follows the Old Testament, and oof, the rules in there, oh boy. So, like, you know, religion's the problem.
Jihad is a religious war against the infidels. To many Europeans, the words infidels and heresy probably remind them of dark days that played out hundreds of years ago,
Yeah,
when
religious
Catholics and
times.
Protestants were killing each other. Sadly, this is still the situation in some parts of the Muslim world. Just think about the organizations you hear about in the Muslim world: Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, ISIS, Al Qaeda, Boko Haram, the Taliban. These aren't national organizations, they are all religious organizations.
Right.
Now let's talk about the Bigger issue, values. Lots of people run from this as if they were running from fire because the biggest concern is potentially being called a racist.
No, I don't think so.
I want to be 100% clear here, although I know that some will do.
Oh, but if you like, okay, so earlier this guy he was painting basically, people from the Arab countries in the area as lower forms of human life. So that is, I mean, essentially it's racist. It's like, well, look at this group. Look at this group of people. They're dirty, whatever, blah blah blah. And look at us. We're so superior in technology and stuff. I could do that, and that would be racist. And that would also be ignoring the conditions that led to people being in the conditions that they're in, or in the place that they're in. So.
Their best to misunderstand me. If I say that men are more violent than women, does it mean I hate all men? No. Does it mean that I think all men are violent? No. Does it mean that there are no violent women? No. But if in almost all countries, more than 90% of those in jails are men, then you can say that men are more violent than women. I believe you can criticize anyone for anything. You can criticize me as a Jew, as an Israeli, as a man, as a tour guide. You can criticize me for things I can't change.
Bro's doing identity politics right here, probably partially to cover his butt for, basically making racist comments against, Arab people, so Arabic people.
Like my identity, and for the things I chose, like my profession, the music I like, the fact that I'm a father. My identity is comprised of thousands of different aspects, and you can criticize any.
This has nothing. I don't care about any of this stuff. What the problem is, again, this country is killing people in this country en masse. And controlling this country, and this has caused a conflict. That's the problem.
One of them, and I can agree or disagree. I can say, true, Israelis aren't very polite and they don't know how to form a queue, but I'm different. And I can also accept the criticism. If you are not a narcissist, you know that you're not perfect. I don't subscribe to the narrative that you're only allowed to say good things about other groups and criticize your own. I actually want to be criticized. I want to be made to think.
Okay, well, my criticism of you is that your arguments have nothing to do with the current conflict, as much as you'd like to think they do. This is really just appealing to history, appealing to, past persecution, appealing to racism in the case where you're trying to make the point that, those people are more, like lower level cognitive abilities or something than you guys, that you're superior race. So, I mean, those types of things are just not valid arguments for killing a lot of people, Now, if you, like, what I would hope would be addressed is things like I hear arguments from both sides. Now, they're very, very different. But the arguments that I get from Israel, I mean, like, a lot of those are debunked, like, very, without any doubt, debunked. And, like, these generals are like, oh, look at this, you see, here's evidence. Oh, we just missed Hamas. And then the evidence comes out that was planted by the Israeli government. It's like, okay, they also make claims like, oh, we're getting hit with like 6,000 rockets a day, and then we just politely tap on an apartment building like, hey, all those rockets came from your building. We're going to have to blow up that building, so you guys can get out. Sorry, And then the next day, 6,000 more rockets are launched into just annihilating Israel. And then they just politely tap on that apartment building. So, okay, so if this is the case, there should be overwhelming evidence. Like they should never need to doctor evidence. What are they doing? Or like the case where they put out like the national government put out a video, and they said, look, this is to show you the truth. This is to show you that Palestinians are actually just pretending to have been hurt or whatever. And they posted this video. It was actually footage, like behind the scenes footage for a movie that had been released in some other country. And it was basically like after the scene was done, filmed, the actors and got up and stuff like that. But this was, made years and years ago, and this is from a different country. So they use that to say, hey, look, yeah, people aren't being. Why would they do that? Oh, we're not really killing people over there. Oh, we're being so nice, and oh, look at this. But like all their stuff seems to just be doctored, and you look at the numbers of people who are dying in Israel, it's extremely low. And like, are they being attacked now by Hamas? I mean, now it seems pretty much like it's entirely in Gaza. Like the war is entirely on Palestinian land. So anyway, yeah, that's my criticism of you. Is your arguments are irrelevant. You're sort of belittling. You're low key racist. You appeal to history. You appeal to all these different things that have no bearing whatsoever on the current situation and what's being done. And yeah, so I think basically your whole premises are flawed, and like you've got no foundation to really make arguments on your behalf that you've presented, at least. I mean, I haven't heard any arguments on your behalf. Nothing that actually matters in the current situation.
To be made to improve my ways. The Me Too movement made me rethink the way I interact with women and made me more aware of the language I use. I criticize all groups: Americans, Germans, Britney Spears fans, ultra-Orthodox Jews, women, like Gen Z, and Muslims.
Post hoc,
I even criticize
trying to
the
cover
most
your
dangerous
butt
group
or something.
of all, Israeli mothers. If a teacher writes that she is sick, there is no need for 30 get well soon messages. You don't show that you care by writing a message. You're just spamming my WhatsApp. If there were peace in all of the Middle East and only the Arab Muslim Palestinians were resorting to violence, I would say, okay, maybe we are in the wrong. But if the Palestinians were using violence before 1967 and before 1948, and almost all of the Arab Muslim countries are dictatorships with high levels of violence and low levels of human rights, then maybe there's really a problem here. I'm also getting comments from Muslims blaming colonialism and the Americans for all the problems in the Muslim world. And it is true that the creation of many countries and borders in Africa and Asia were determined by the interest of the European empires, and that the US think primarily about its own interest. But I'm always shocked to find that Muslims take no responsibility for their wrongdoing. The fact that most of the Muslim countries aren't democratic has nothing to do with the US. The fact that
I don't know, like I've seen footage, and of course I'm not an expert in this field, whatever, but I've seen footage from, what is it, I think Afghanistan back in the 70s or something like that, and they were like progressive, and then basically the US effed them up big time and funded terrorists and freedom fighters and whatever, people, and they gained a lot of power, and now look at the state of the country. So I think the U.S. does have more than its fair share to blame in those regions. How long was the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and what was accomplished? I mean, basically we just terrorized a nation, and then what was the point? Yeah, anyway, so
17 of the 20 most dangerous countries for the LGBTQ community are Muslims has nothing to do with colonialism.
This guy does not care about the LGBTQ community. I mean, I don't have evidence of that, but this guy does not. He's using this to hit the left, to kind of get them on his side. But anyway,
the fact that almost all of the most dangerous places in the world to be Christians are Muslim,
and appealing to Christians to try to get them on his side.
The Muslim world is huge. It has a lot of oil, and its failure has very little to do with colonialism. Look at the Jews. 1/3 of them were murdered by the Nazis. Israel has no oil and it is surrounded by enemies, and yet we are successful. And it's not because of American money. Most of
Yeah, they get a lot of money from the U.S. I forget. Anyway, you can look it up. I'm not going to waste your time here.
that money has to be used to buy military equipment from American companies. And
Yeah,
beside
we
the
give them
Palestinians get way
military
more money,
equipment.
we are successful because we are open-minded, think outside the box, invest in education, and are not violent. This is true outside the Middle East too.
What?
Look at Arab Muslim communities in Europe. If there were violent riots in Paris or Sweden, Rotterdam or London, would it be in the Jewish neighborhoods or the Arab neighborhoods? Peace will only come when the Arabs change their values, when Muslim countries become democratic, when all of the different groups in Syria stop killing one another, when Iranian women are free to cover or not cover their hair.
Hey, you know, I gotta say, I have no love for, well, religions of any kind, but especially when they're what do you call it? Fundamental, and I mean, basically, the more fundamental, the more human rights go right out the window, and it's just the worst conditions that people are raised in, and yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible. This should be the lesson of the whole video here: is religion is the problem. Religion is the problem. Are you guys, anyway, you guys getting that? Anyway.
When gay men are not thrown from rooftops in Gaza or thrown into jail.
So he's just trying, yeah, he's trying to get the left onto his side. Like, hey, you know what? It's okay if we kill these guys because look, Arabs in general, they'll throw gay people off rooftops, and you guys like the gay people, right? So that's what he's doing here.
By the PLO, when the Christian population stops shrinking in the Middle East, and when the Israeli Arabs stop killing one another, then and only then will there be true peace. Please like and share this video with any friend who needs to see this. I have much more to say about this topic, so please write a comment. If you find it interesting, please consider supporting my work. All the details are below. Yalla bye.
Yeah, so no, I'm not going to like and subscribe because, again, he didn't make any valid arguments that address the current situation. It's just appeals to history, yeah, yada, yada, yada. And then in the end, basically the last, I don't know, 5 minutes or more, he is just kind of trying to check a bunch of boxes and like, okay, all right, I set some dog whistles here to my base, like whatever. I'm going to try to check the boxes here to try to get the left on my side so they're okay with us killing Arabs, and then, kind of dehumanizing, basically. So, sorry, you didn't get me on this one. It's like people are people, and they might be raised in worse conditions, but that doesn't make them any less human. It just means that they grew up in worse conditions, and actually, I feel bad for them at that point. That they had that sort of thing. Other people have better opportunities. Good for them. Basically, I'm going to get a little bit deep for a second and then end this video. But let's consider the concept of free will for a second, because if you think about everything in history, like this guy appeals to, leading up until today, everything that's ever happened led to you being born, okay? And then you being born, you were raised in certain circumstances around certain people and influences and education and blah, 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 like the environment that you were raised in. All those things shape who you are, right? I think we all have sort of a natural personality that also kind of interacts with the circumstances around. But how well we're nurtured has a lot to do with our growth. Just like anything else, if you have a plant, for example, and it's not taken care of properly, well, it's not going to grow properly. If it's grown under the best conditions, it's going to be probably pretty amazing, pretty amazing looking plant. It's going to reach its full potential anyway. regardless. So judging one plant that was taken care of well as opposed to another that wasn't, and saying, well, this one's clearly a superior species of plant, even though they're the same species. Yeah, that's it's pretty ignorant, actually. So, yeah, this guy absolutely had nothing of value to say as far as I'm concerned, unless he was giving a history lesson and dog whistling racist stuff to his base. So that's about it. 5.4 million views. That's a lot, and that's really, to me, that's pretty unfortunate because this guy has spread a lot of really impertinent. He's spread a lot of basically stuff like justifications that have nothing to do with the actual events that are going on. So anyway, that's about it. My first reaction video ever, and yeah, that's it. Bye.